Okay, welcome everyone to tonight. I'm Mary Rasenberger. I'm CEO of the Authors Guild and the Authors Guild Foundation. I want to thank you for joining the Authors Guild Foundation tonight to discuss William Deresiowicz's book, Death of the Artist. We are delighted to have Bill with us and authors and council members Jin Lee and Roxana Robinson, and Authors Guild member and author Josie Brown. Many of you are familiar with the Authors Guild Foundation and our work, but for those of you who are not, it is the charitable and educational arm of the Authors Guild. The foundation works on behalf of all authors. It educates, supports, and protects American writers to ensure that a rich, diverse body of literature can flourish. And we do this because we believe that an abundance of free literary expression, meaning from voices representing all Americans with our many rich cultures and experiences, that's essential to our democracy and that it can be achieved only by protecting authors' constitutional and moral rights to benefit from their work. The Authors Guild and the Authors Guild Foundation are the only organization in the country dedicated to empowering all US authors. I'd like to ask, if not for the 108 years of the Authors Guild work, what would the profession of writing look like today? I mean, how many talented writers would be able to write as a profession? And it's important to remember that in hard times like this past year, writers are particularly crucial and they emerge as some of the most essential voices in our society, voices of integrity that offer insight and perspective to help understand one another and what we're going through. Our work is more important than ever in times such as these, particularly today when authors' incomes have declined by 42% in just 10 years. That's according to the survey we did in 2018 with over 5,000 authors participating. And many authors today we found live below the poverty line. The Authors Guild Foundation is working to combat these declining incomes by delivering crucial resources and education, including entrepreneurial workshops and free legal support to tens of thousands of authors across the country. We also fight tirelessly to safeguard free speech, defend authors' rights, and ensure fair compensation through our extensive advocacy and lobbying efforts. We jump in wherever we can when we see authors being taken advantage of. And if you're not on our email list and don't get our newsletter, I suggest going to our website, authorsguild.org, and signing up for it. There we report on our lobbying and all of our advocacy efforts, as well as our educational programs. Our work is made possible by thousands of supporters and authors, including many of you joining us tonight. So I'd like to extend our most sincere gratitude for your commitment to this work and for unity and working together with us. So thank you very much. Now I'd like to introduce our distinguished panelists. William Deresiewicz, and excuse me, well, Bill, if I'm butchering your name.
Pretty good.
Bill is an award-winning essayist and critic and the best-selling author of Excellent Sheep, The Miseducation of the American Elite, and The Way to a Meaningful Life, as well as the book that is the topic of tonight, The Death of the Artist. Bill has won several awards and also is a three-time National Magazine Award nominee. Bill taught English at Yale and Columbia before becoming a full-time writer in 2008. His work has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Harper's, The American Scholar, and many other publications. Jin Lee is a recipient of several distinguished fellowships. Her novel, Pachinko, was a finalist for the National Book Award for Fiction and a New York Times 10 Best Book in 2017. President Barack Obama selected Pachinko for his recommended reading list, calling it a powerful story about resilience and compassion. Lee's debut novel, Free Food for Millionaires, was also highly acclaimed and a national bestseller. And I should say Min is also on our council, the Authors Guild Council. Roxana Robinson is the author of 6 novels, 3 collections of short stories, and the biography of Georgia O'Keeffe. 4 of these were chosen as New York Times notable books, 2 as New York Times editors' choices. and her fiction has appeared in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, Harper's, Best American Short Stories, Tin House, and elsewhere. Her work has been widely anthologized and broadcast on NPR. She is a past president of the Authors Guild and a recipient of many awards, most recently the Barnes & Noble Writers for Writers Award from Poets and Writers. Josie Brown is also an Authors Guild member, is a traditionally published author with Simon & Schuster and HarperCollins, as well as an independently published author. She's appeared at #1 on Amazon and iBooks on numerous occasions. Josie is the author of the 20-novel Housewife Assassin's Handbook series, in addition to many other works. And her novel, The Secret Lives of Husbands and Wives, was optioned for television. So I want to thank all our panelists for giving us your time tonight. I am now going to ask Bill to give us a high-level summary of the findings and conclusions of his book. And then I'm going to ask our panelists a series of questions to discuss. I should say we have over 500 people signed up for tonight, which is just fantastic. And we received about 100 questions from the audience in advance. So I have folded many of those questions into the questions I'm going to be asking tonight. And we may not have time for additional questions. But I do encourage you to, use the chat feature, and you can also put in additional questions if you like, in case we have time, and we can always respond to them later. So I'd like to turn it over to Bill now.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks for everyone who's listening to this, watching this. Thanks to the Authors Guild for making it possible. I think this is really important. I'm glad we're doing it. So briefly, my book is an attempt to understand how artists are making a living or trying to make a living in the digital age. Artists means writers and musicians, visual artists, creators of film and television. In order to describe the how, and there are a lot of individual stories in the book, I first describe the broad conditions that are shaping that question, that are shaping the arts economy today. There are differences among different arts. There are also a lot of similarities, obviously. Tonight, we're here to talk about writing, in particular about authorship. So that's what I'm going to talk about. I don't think it'll surprise anyone when I say that the overwhelming fact today for authors of all kinds is the rise of Amazon. Amazon has a monopoly in the book selling market, accounting for over half of all sales, which means that from the perspective of the producers of books, of publishers and independent authors, it has a monopsony, as the economists call it, in the book buying market. A monopsony exists when a single purchaser dominates a market. This is the model that Jeff Bezos copied from Walmart. You slash prices for consumers by squeezing suppliers. And if the suppliers go out of business, well, there'll always be other suppliers to come along. Amazon squeezes publishers for price reductions. It squeezes big commercial publishers, small commercial publishers, nonprofit and academic presses, and independent authors. And so this is one of the reasons that advances have been falling across the board in recent years. Another reason advances have been falling across the board has to do with the blockbuster logic that rules the internet. Basically, the way that network platforms work ensures that the big get bigger and everybody else gets smaller. So sales have increased for the biggest books, the biggest bestsellers, and they've dropped for all others. Now, if advances have historically been one of the main ways that authors and writers have generated revenue, the other one is journalism, broadly speaking, meaning freelance work for magazines and newspapers. And we know what's happened to journalism. Craigslist came along and wiped out the classifieds, and then Google and Facebook have come along since and gobbled up most of the remaining advertising revenue. There's actually now an important third player in advertising revenue online, and that's Amazon. So freelance fees have plummeted as a result. They're sometimes to a small fraction of what they were 20 or 30 years ago. And while the internet has certainly enabled the creation of myriad new sites, they typically pay little or nothing. So I've been talking about the main features of the income side of the balance sheet for writers, but we also need to talk about the other side, which are expenses. And this is one of those things that cuts across the arts. It's not particular to authors and writers. And the two main factors here are rent and tuition. Rent is up Median rent is up 42%, adjusted for inflation, since 2000. 42% in the last 20 years, and much more in the creative centers where artists tend and often need to live, especially when they're young. New York, LA, Chicago, Boston, Washington. Tuition has also soared. And in addition to college, there's now the universal expectation, if you want a teaching position at a college or university, that you have to get an MFA. So that's a lot of bad news, but there's also some good news that the internet has brought about. The internet has also clearly opened up an enormous range of new opportunities, above all by enabling you to connect directly with your audience. So there's crowdfunding, especially Patreon and Kickstarter among the artists that I spoke with. There's the opportunity to teach classes and workshops, either remotely online or in person, at least when there isn't a pandemic, but enabled, set up, and promoted with online tools. There's more ability now to generate commercial client work, whether that means business writing or ghost writing, or freelance editing of manuscripts or college essays. There's opportunity for branded content and much else. There are podcasts, which a lot of writers have gone into. Now we have Substack, which is yet another new platform built on the concept of direct audience engagement and, as they say, monetization, getting money directly from your audience. I should also mention that an important revenue source now for writers is something that the internet has brought about in a kind of negative way, I think, which is the lecture circuit. More and more authors are earning more and more money, more of their income by giving talks. I think this is a negative effect because as our existence becomes increasingly mediated and virtual, we put a higher and higher premium on in-person experiences. So it's basically the equivalent for writers of what's happened with live performance for musicians, which is that there's more and more of it and ticket prices have gone up substantially. And finally, on the good side, there is, of course, the most conspicuous development in the world of writing in the digital age, which is self-publication. And I'm very glad that we have a self-published or independent author on the panel today, because it's so important. Self-publication through any of the many platforms that now exist, like Smashwords or Kindle Direct Publishing, which is Amazon's, means the ability to make your book available for sale instantly and without the need to ask the blessing of a publisher around the world. You can design it yourself, edit it yourself. You don't have to ask anyone's permission, and you can price it yourself and receive the lion's share of the proceeds, sometimes even 100%. So I talked about the bad news, I talked about the good news, and now I have to talk about the bad news about the good news. First of all, you have the freedom to pursue a host of new opportunities. That's the good news. The bad news is, so does everybody else. The numbers are mind-boggling. As of 2018, there were 500,000 podcasts. As of now, there are 1.5 million podcasts. In 2016, over 800,000 books were self-published. By 2018, I don't know what it is now, but by 2018, we were already above twice that. It was nearly 1.7 million books self-published in 2018. More broadly, every writer who wants to get a hearing for their work must compete not only with every other writer, as in the old days when the realms of culture were more or less separate, but with every other entity that has a presence in what we call the attention economy, since we're now all competing on the same giant playing field. The other big piece of bad news is that while you can do it yourself, you also have to do it yourself. And doing it yourself means doing it all yourself. Freeing yourself from the culture industry, from publishers and agents and so forth, means replicating on your own all the functions of the culture industry: management, production, marketing, promotion. Or, as in the case of many independent authors, hiring people to perform those functions: editors, designers, consultants. And even if you aren't, strictly speaking, doing it yourself, if you are still publishing with commercial presses or other presses, you still, and every author knows this, I think, you still have to do a lot of it yourself because your publisher expects you to. And frankly, you expect yourself to. because you want to do everything possible to make your book a success. You know, you might bring out a book once every 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and you're going to do everything you can. So you hit social media, you beat the bushes for blurbs, you promoted yourself to podcasts, you pay for and attend to a website and anything else you can think of, and those things multiply all the time. By way of conclusion, I want to say that I did not write this book to depress or discourage anyone. I know it sounds like that. I wrote it because I think that the clearer we are about what's going on for writers these days, the better equipped we'll be, both individually and collectively, to deal with it. And dealing with it, after all, is part of what the Authors Guild is about. So, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. So that was a very good summary. There's so much more in the book, though, and hopefully we'll draw out a little bit about it as we talk tonight. And I do really recommend that everybody read the book. So first of all, Bill talks about in the book how money is the last thing people want to think about when it comes to art. And you describe how in the 18th century, we developed this romantic notion of the artist, genius, and art became a secular religion of sorts. Today, we still think money sullies true art in some manner. Bill, you reported that many artists also feel that treating their work as a business makes them a sellout, that they shouldn't be making money somehow. You know, that art's too precious to be making money from. Then you also describe how some techno pundits, and I love that term, I'm going to use that, how they defend their anti-copyright ideologies by describing making art purely as an act of love and also as sort of a compulsion. You know, writers will write whether or not they're paid, so they don't need the incentives copyright provides. I can't tell you how often in the copyright world that I'm often in, the intellectual copyright world, how often I hear that. Well, why, you know, writers are going to write anyway. So I think actually this is one of the most important points in the book, and how Bill brings to light this view of art as detached from economy, as though artists live on air, and that it's a social construct, and it's, you know, a social construct of the last couple hundred years. And that notion, it's detached from the reality of being an artist today in our market economy. So I want to ask you, particularly Min and Roxana, how you respond to that as professional authors. Is it true that thinking about money affects your art, or, you know, or is it a romantic, precious notion we need to get away from? As literary writers, do you feel any pressure to not worry about money? Min, do you want to go first, Roxana?
Sure. First of all, I want to thank Bill for his book, and I want to thank Mary for all the heavy lifting that you're doing. I also want to thank the Authors Guild for sticking up for us, because we really need some help. It's tough out there, as Bill's book attests. I think that I worry about money all the time. I grew up in a working class background. I don't think anybody in my planet ever thought that I would be an artist. So it's really a surprise to me. It took me 12 years to publish my first book. And those 12 years that I was working on that book, as well as my other book and all the other manuscripts that I didn't publish, it was so humiliating and difficult. And I had a lot of financial problems during that time. It would have been great if I had a rich uncle, like in the 19th century, just like drop off some money, but that didn't happen. So I struggle all the time. Right now, I have 5 jobs, and I serve as well. I serve on 2 national boards, and I do it because I think it's important that writers have advocacy. But of my 5 jobs, I could probably make a living on 4 of them. But I don't know anybody who works 24 hours, 7 days a week like I do. And I do it because I like it. I like my work, but I'm exhausted. And I've never worked so hard in my life. I'm 52 years old. I didn't think I'd be working this hard at my age. But then I also know that I get to do this work. And because I have so many friends who are writers and artists who are having such a difficult time. And I also know that I do a lot of free work, which is my other 6th job, which is so much about trying to help other writers because I know what it's like not to have support. So I wish I could say I don't care about money, but yeah, when I get paid, it's great. But then there's so many things that I do for no money at all. And I think that's kind of part of this economy. It's a really weird economy where a lot of rich people who are insiders have always controlled it. And I'm never going to lie about that. I think you're on mute, honey.
Who?
Can you hear me
oh.
now?
Yeah.
Oh, Mary.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. So Roxana, do you have anything to add? Do you feel pressure not to associate your work with money?
So it's a really interesting question, and it's one that's been sort of batted back and forth. It's useful to remember that Tolstoy wrote Anna Karenina as a serial and made money, and he wrote it because he wanted to buy a huge tract of land, which is not why most people write novels. And Flaubert's Madame Bovary was a huge bestseller because he was sued, and he also wrote that as a serial novel. So, I mean, the thing is that there are great writers who have been bestsellers, and I can say without fear of contradiction, all writers want to be bestsellers because it means that people want to read your work. So that's the founding principle of writers, is that we want to reach an audience. The question of money becomes very delicate. When I was the president of the Authors Guild, I was on Bloomberg News for something or other. I guess it was when we were suing Google, and I was attacked by a journalist, by a tech journalist, who called me a snowflake because writers wanted to be paid for their work. And you show me the tech company that gives away its work for free, and then we're called snowflakes. I said to him, so just tell me, just let me get this straight. Are you paid for the work that you do, or is this something that you give away? So writers are expected, when it suits them by the tech company, to work for nothing. But the same intellectual property that they produce is guarded by dragons and hot irons. So of course writers have to make money. We don't want to write and be given a series of rules saying the market won't support it unless you write about whatever, dragons. But we want to write about what we want to write about. But the market has been disappearing, and this set of fatuous rules have sort of evolved as explanations from the tech company who have taken the money away from us that we were always paid for our work, our intellectual property, our ideas, our words. What we're meant to do is produce words. And the whole market that provided monetary value in exchange for our words has been drained away by the technology industry.
Thanks. So let me ask you guys this. Bill does talk about how just in the 21st century, in the last decade or so, it's gotten that much harder for artists to earn a living. You also talked about how the cost of living has skyrocketed. And you talk about the ongoing loss of the middle class artists, which you define as those who make art as their principal vocation, who regularly publish, release, perform, etc., and have won some recognition. And those that middle class, what we often refer to as working writers, are now many of them not able to support themselves at a middle class level. So I want to ask the other panelists, in your experience, do you find that it's harder to make a living from your work today? Have you seen a change in the last decade or so? Who wants to go first?
I'll take that.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill and Mary, for including me on this panel. I think it's a very important panel to have for anyone who sees who wants a career as a writer. A career is different from a hobby in that, as a career, you want to make a living from it. You want to be able to feed your family and pay your rent and maybe go on vacation every now and then. You want to do normal things. And Roxana, I can thoroughly relate to how you felt about that journalist, and shame on him. He is a journalist. And, you know, when you love what you do, yes, you still want to make money at it. I don't care who you are. Unless you're, you know, you're a trust fund baby, which none of us are, and most of us aren't. So yes, the industry has changed dramatically. And for all the reasons that Bill already described, but it is constantly moving. It is it's a chutes and ladders game. And whether you're, you know, at the top of the ladder, at the bottom, depends on how quick you are to pick up on the trends that are happening in the industry. I'm both traditionally published and independently published. I had 6 books with New York, and I've had 32 books on my own. And, you know, I can honestly say that, you know, not everything I pitched New York was ever bought, which is why I'm glad I had an alternative for how I got my books out. But yes, you know, you are picking up, as Bill pointed out, the bulk of the marketing, the promotion, distribution, production. So but you do that in everything, in any job you would have, you would be doing that. Whether you were running a corner store or, you know, manufacturing a widget, you'd still be doing that. So being an artist, you can be an artist in a lot of ways. I mean, Bill picks up on that in his book. You can be a photographer and love the art that you're doing. But I don't know a photographer who doesn't want to make money. So, or an architect. Most of the architects I know were illustrators in some way, shape, or form. So the bottom line is we should be making money from our art. And one of the wonderful things that I feel the Authors Guild gives us is the advocacy to do so. Because yes, intellectual property belongs to us. We are creators, first and foremost. If we're not creating, you know, then what are we? We love putting words on a page. So I appreciate the fact that we have somebody there who looks after us and says, here's a violation of your intellectual property. And here's how we're going to deal with it and how we're going to approach it legally, ethically. And we're the voices for the Authors Guild, but we're also the voices for everybody who we know and love in our art.
Thank you, Josie. Roxana or Min, have you experienced sort of this decline in in incomes in the last 10, 12 years, either yourself or just seeing it more generally in the field?
I can say, certainly, I mean, I used to write for magazines, travel pieces or cultural essays, and that market is just gone. And lots of writers would depend on that to do several essays or articles a year. I mean, depending on what your status was, but those are gone. And also the market for teachers has changed drastically. We all know what's happening to adjunct teachers, and as the landscape in university finances has changed, teachers get paid less and less. So lots of writers I know teach at 3 different colleges because they can't. One college will not pay them enough to sustain their livelihood. When I went to Bennington, and when I went there, you could be, I mean, Stanley Edgar Hyman was a teacher there, and Bernard Malamud, and you could live on a teacher's salary, and they wrote for New York Review and magazines like that, and they were comfortable, and and they weren't bestsellers at all, but they were part of that middle class of writers that could support themselves writing. And now everyone's scrambling. You're told to write for nothing, write for Medium if you can't get it into the New York Times, write for the Huffington Post for nothing. We're all treated like people that are beggars.
Yeah.
I find that I think that's absolutely true about the freelance journalism market, because I remember being paid $2.50 to $3 a word for a Condé Nast publication, and I think now I won't mention any major magazine names that I've been in where I've been paid a comically small amount just for the prestige aspect of it. And they usually are quite apologetic, saying like, oh, we know that it's not very much, but but we really want to have your voice, etc. And I never quite know exactly what that means. And I don't want to get too deep into it. But as I said before, I have 5 jobs because it gives me a lot of freedom to never become too dependent on one source of income. So I do teach. I also do freelance for very, very select publications that I personally feel connected to. And I have that choice right now. Again, like tomorrow it might be gone. And then I also write books. So I have some contracts for books. I also speak, and a big chunk of my income can come from speaking. And then, but again, I will write original speeches for an audience. And what else do I do? I also write for television now. And that's another field, which I think Bill mentions in his book, that's a slightly growing field. And that's something that I taught myself how to do. I don't have a degree in any of these things. I went to law school. I don't have an MFA. I don't have a PhD. I wasn't even an English major. But I think that a part of me, I'm deeply interested in learning stuff. So if I'm interested in a certain field, I'll buy 20 books or I'll borrow 20 books and I'll just read them all and I'll go, why don't I give it a shot? So I figure, and this is sort of an old idea, I feel like I am a woman of letters. I will figure it out and then I'll try it. And if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. But I think having a long history of rejection has been sort of helpful for me, because I'm okay if people say no to me, because I'm like, I've heard it before for 10 years. I mean, just keep saying no. But maybe I don't know if it's an immigrant thing or a female thing or both, or just being formerly working class. I cannot depend on an industry to take care of me. I know I live in a neoliberal economy. I'm very aware of it. And it's not just technocracy. We live in a world that's really focused on data. And now we have that data available. And therefore our advances have dramatically changed depending upon the numbers that we sell. So now I do social media. I'm 52 and I'm on Instagram. How embarrassing is that? And so all that stuff I'm doing because I want to adapt. I want to be able to put a roof over my head and have health insurance. Like, why am I struggling for health insurance? I'm the primary breadwinner for my family. So, and I'm willing to say that. And if people look down at me for saying that, well, fuck them. I mean, I really don't care. But I've had to be this sort of scrappy about it because I don't really have a choice. And I like what I do. And I feel like what I have to say for my world, and to me personally, it matters. So I'm going to keep trying to say it until someone says we're not interested in anymore, because that could happen too tomorrow, like in about an hour. So, and I'm aware of that.
One of the audience members posted a question that, so does this mean that all literary writers now need to write for Netflix, instead of their literary projects? And what I'm hearing from you, Minjin, is that, well, you do both, you do it all, but it does come at some cost to, your personal life because you're working all the time.
Yeah, I don't have a personal life. But you know what I can say? I remember I had a really nice meal with Gary Steingart, another really incredibly talented writer who I really admire. And he and I were talking and he goes, well, it's possible that they might not want to read my books at a certain point, and then I do something else. And, he went to Stuyvesant High School. I went to Bronx Science. We're both, kids from the boroughs, and we're both immigrant kids. And we're like, yeah, you got to sort of figure it out and you got to hustle. So maybe that's embarrassing to say that, but it's true for me. And because it's very possible that one thing dried up. I didn't anticipate the pandemic. So I had about 20 events for speaking this year that I was supposed to have, and about 15 of them got postponed to next year. I mean, that's a tremendous source of my income. So I thought, okay, well, I guess I better figure out something else. And there was interest from television. So I thought maybe I'll look at this thing. I mean, I don't know if I'm really going to do it, but I'm doing a little bit right now. But I guess you're right. I could do more of it. And then I'd have to make some prioritization decisions.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing up the pandemic, actually, because that has had an enormous impact on many authors, and particularly because of the loss of speaking fees, but also many authors do some adjunct teaching, and a lot of adjunct teachers have lost their positions. So I just wanted to put in a word for the Authors Guild, we have been lobbying for extended pandemic unemployment relief. And I should tell you, we can talk afterwards, Min, and any member of the Authors Guild, feel free to reach out to us about this. But you should be able to get pandemic unemployment insurance for the loss of that kind of income. And it's, it's just the states have made it really hard to get it. But we are working on that and trying to get it extended beyond the end of the year. So I want to now just, turn to this idea of writing or art as a business. Bill, you talk about it a lot in the book, that it is a business in the market economy, and you're like any business, you've got to offer something that people want, and have to market yourself. So Josie, I'd like you to take this question first. I imagine you and you said this, you think of yourself as a business, and self-publishing particularly, you really have to, because you're doing everything or hiring people to do everything. And you probably have to focus on it on a daily basis. And how does that affect you as an artist? I'm also wondering if you can respond to some of the things that Bill said. Does it take a certain kind of personality or type of book to self-publish?
Well, you can self-publish fiction or nonfiction, and the decision that I've made that's sort of different from what Min has done, and I don't know if Roxana is more doing what Min has done or what I'm doing, but I used to, my first job was in marketing and advertising. Next, I kind of segued over to journalism, and we would have like 3 or 4 or 5 clients or projects going at any given point in time. My husband is also a writer. So, and we would, look at the spreadsheet and say, okay, well, this month we're making this much of this from, from this project, this project, this project. All that time, I was not writing my books, the books that I wanted to write. And it wasn't until I made the decision to write full time as a novelist that I actually, started making money as a novelist. I had to make that leap or I would never write the books I wanted to write. And I'm still, I do write commercial lit, but I do have other books that I want to write. So what I do is my second job, 3rd, 4th, and 5th are my commercial books, but my, the books of my heart are now coming to fruition too. So I think there's a way to do it. And in answer to Mary's question as to how you look at it as a business, no matter whether you're writing for traditional publishers or you're writing for yourself, you will always have the main issue of promotion, which I think is where we all stumble, because the big guys stumble. If they stumble, we're going to stumble. I had a little heads up working in advertising, so I kind of know how to look at demographics and apply it to myself. What kind of books am I writing? Who am I writing them for? The books that I sold to New York and the books that I have done for myself, I call them light, bright, and gay, because they aren't the heavy subject books that eventually, I know I'll be tackling. But at the same time, they've made me money. I enjoy writing them. They're a different part of who I am. So I think there is a way, excuse my ear thing for coming out. I think that you have to approach it as a business. You have to say, I know how much I have to make this year. I know, and you have to set, and you have to push yourself. Obviously, it's easier to do that independently, but that doesn't mean you can't get an agent or that you can't throw something to an agent and see what the agent can do. You just see that's a different income source. You have to look at it that way. Your titles are your projects. Your projects can be revenue generators. Your titles can be revenue generators, but you have to look at them. You can't just throw it out there and, do the old Austin Powers thing, one for the ages, here, catch my camera. You can't do that. You are the camera. You are the film. You are everything. You are the image, and you are the brand. And that's the other big thing. It's the brand you want to be.
Yeah. Thank you, Josie. So we did get a lot of questions from the audience around marketing. And I want to talk a little bit about that right now. I do, though, first want to tell everyone that we are doing some webinars right after the new year on marketing generally, on social media, and on self-publishing. So I don't want to get into like specific advice tonight. This is a more, much broader topic, but I do just want to touch on this with Min and Roxana, just this, like, how much marketing do you have to do? Because we know that even traditionally, in traditional publishing, a lot of the marketing is being put back on the authors now, and how do you juggle that with your writing? Do you guys engage in social media? And I think one good question that came from the audience is it possible to sell books today without being on social media? Do either of you want to respond to any of those questions?
I kind of think we're approaching this from the wrong side of it. I think we're hearing from all of us. We all know that we have to make writing into a business, and I don't think that's really different from the way it was in the 19th century. Anthony Trollope got up at 5 a.m. and started writing before he went to his day job. Lots of writers have treated it as a business and they have marketed themselves, and that's not new. What's new is the fact that these tech companies have drained the money from the market that we used to be able to receive for our work. So the fact that we all used to be able to teach and sell magazine articles to glossy magazines, the magazines are foundering. They're all going out of business. It's not really that they choose not to pay us. Nobody's reading those, buying those subscriptions to big glossy magazines. They're all going out of business. It's the big tech platforms, Facebook and Amazon. Those are the places where the money is just being drained out. And anybody who's on Facebook or Instagram is writing for Mark Zuckerberg and the tech company. We're putting our words up there for nothing, and they are benefiting from it, from the clicks and the ad revenue. So I don't have a solution, but I don't think it's the fact that writers are working less hard or that we don't understand that we have to market. We do that, and we've always done that. We've done whatever we could, but the money's being drained out of the system, so that no matter what we do, we're unable to catch up with the fact that the revenues have gone. And that when, I know you're going to get to this, Mary, but the thing that I find so frustrating is that whenever one of us publishes a book and it comes out brand new for whatever it is, $32, within 5 days, within 5 hours, Amazon is selling some secret source third-party seller who is selling that book for $2. And that's a book we don't get any royalties on. And our readers are saying, great, why should we pay $32 when we can buy it for $2? So that's where that's what's draining away. It's not the fact that we don't have enough jobs, or that we aren't putting enough energy into marketing. It's that the money for our product is, the system now doesn't allow it to reach us.
Yeah, good point. And I think it's also, though, that there's, authors are required to do, so much marketing without having, the publishers don't have budgets for much publicity for most books. But Bill, I'd like you to just, what has it been for you having a book come out during the pandemic and trying to market it?
It's been pretty challenging. Thank you, Min. People who don't know, people who aren't writers, friends of mine have said, well, it must be good to put a book out during the pandemic because people have lots of time to read and people are reading more. And that may or may not be true, but what people who aren't in the business don't understand is that the trick is not to get people to read your book. The trick is to get people to hear about your book. Mm-hmm. That's why this has been so difficult. And as difficult as it's been for me, I felt so bad for the debut authors who had books coming out in March and April who just got completely buried because nobody had any attention span. And by nobody, I mean especially the media, had no attention span to talk about anything except the pandemic and the election. And that's what this year has been. So I've done literally about 50 different things in the 3 months since the book came out, many of them podcasts. This is one of them, remote events at bookstores, all kinds of things. And I continue to beat the bushes about it and contact colleges and universities to do things next semester and so forth. I just did want to say one thing in response to your previous question, and it partly to Roxana. There is something different what Roxana says is incredibly important about the tech platform, but there is something different. Yes, writers have always worked really hard, but this relentless self-marketing is something that's pretty new. Martin Amis, about 20 years ago, he said, it used to be that you just handed a book in to your publisher and that was it. And he was complaining about having to do an author tour. In the 20 years since then, it's just as the communication channels multiply and multiply and multiply, and the publisher's marketing budgets go down, there's just more and more and more stuff to do. And I think, Mary, in that Guild survey you referenced earlier, I think you found that authors reported something like a 60% increase in the previous few years in the amount of time they devoted to marketing.
Yeah, on average, it's up to 9 hours a week now, or it was 2 years ago in our last survey. That's a lot.
Yeah.
If I had to add 9 hours of social media on top of my job, I'd go nuts. So I want to move on to the elephant in the room, which Roxana, you raised, and that is Amazon. And I'd also say even the consolidation in the industry. I mean, today we learned that Penguin Random House and HarperCollins are both putting in bids for Simon & Schuster, which will leave us with 4 big publishing companies and 2 massive ones, or 1 mega massive one. So, and that, I think it makes it harder and harder to negotiate with publishers when there are fewer big ones. But I do want to talk about Amazon, because Amazon is, a relatively new entry into the book market. If you're looking, sort of at the long term, in just 20 years, it now sells 80%, more than 80% of all ebooks, of all audiobooks, and all self-published books, and over half of every book that's sold. And it's because it's a monopsony, which means that publishers and authors, the suppliers of the books, have no option but to sell through Amazon. Amazon is able to set the terms it wants. And arguably, we, the Authors Guild, argue this, they're taking more out of the publishing ecosystem than is sustainable. We know for traditional publishers, they charge, fees if you want your books discoverable, fees if you want to make sure, get special services, make sure that your books are always in stock. And if they're not in stock, then the third-party sellers can get the buy button. And 90% of the time, whatever retailer has the buy button, that's where the sale is made. So it's I just want to talk a little bit now about how the advent of Amazon's monopsony in the book retail space has impacted, the 4 of you in your profession. And Roxana, do you want to talk? You've already talked a little bit about the secondhand or the third-party seller phenomena. Do you want to add?
Yeah, I'm sure you all, the rest of you experience this. It's really devastating for a writer to see that your work is being sold immediately as a used copy, or will say, your book has been out for 2 weeks, and there are copies that are claimed to be hardly used, but good as new, but sold as used books. And there's a whole channel of sales that go through without any royalties. So your book is eliminated from the place where it could bring you revenues, and we have no recourse. There's nothing for us to do. We can't say to Amazon, we want you to sell this book as a new book and sell it through the proper channels so that your suppliers, us, the authors, can be sustained. Our lives can be sustained. Before Amazon, as we all know, your book was sold in a regular bookstore for a certain period of time, and they didn't carry used books. Used books were sold separately in a different business. And the books sold until they stopped selling or were put out of print, and then they were sold as used copies. But you got the revenues you got the royalties. And Amazon has just destroyed that. So that's where we are now. And I think that's the biggest problem that we face.
Thanks. Josie, I'd like to hear your take on how your profession, how you've interfaced with Amazon, and maybe we can also talk a little bit about Audible and the what's going on with them right now. But in a minute. But I assume you do some publishing through Amazon. Do you
Yes, I
want to
do.
talk about that?
I publish both through Amazon and through Ingram. So Ingram gets me into every place that Amazon won't allow Amazon in, i.e. the independent bookstores. I don't take returns on my books. Okay, so that's the difference between me and a traditionally published project. They take returns, and they've been doing it since the 40s, I think. And that whole model is what is really killing a lot of, I think it's killing a lot of authors. And as it turns out, Amazon, if you print through Amazon, they also do not take returns. And that forced Ingram's hand, who also wanted to get with the independent publishers, like myself, independent authors. And they gave us if you don't want to take returns, don't. I never do. Now, granted, that means I will never be a bestseller and I won't see my books all in stores. But because I build my own brand, people request my books at their local bookstore. And I can see that every day when I go into my dashboard, my Amazon dashboard. I see what I sell to Amazon customers, but in my Ingram dashboard, I see what I sell into independent bookstores. So that's the big difference that I feel is a good difference. And I have had issues where I have seen my book cheaper than myself, or my buy button. All of a sudden, it's not me with the buy button, it's somebody else. And that's when I start yelling at Amazon, and I get on the phone and I talk for 2 hours, seriously. So that eats up a lot of my day, of saying, hey, this isn't cool. You're my printer and my distributor. We're partners in this. Why is that happening? And their usual excuse is you are still getting a royalty. What you're saying is, what they're not telling us, and what they'll kind of tell you in an off the cuff kind of way, is we're allowing somebody else to buy the button, but they still have to pay for you, and you still get your royalty. So that's a plus. And because I'm my own publisher on books that I publish myself, which are usually trade paperback, I probably make 3 times more than I would have even after they take out printing, and after they take out their distribution costs. I make more on my print books than I would with New York. So it's a different it's a different platform. It's a different model.
Yeah, one thing about the self-publishing on Amazon or any of these platforms is that in traditional publishing, at least there's this theory that you can negotiate an agreement. Most terms are not negotiable, as it turns out, but there's some negotiating around the edges. With self-publishing, these are click-through agreements, and Amazon just gets to decide what they're going to take, and there's just, you can choose one model or the other, but that's really the only ability you have to negotiate. And I just want to let people know, and Josie, you can jump in and add to this, that just recently it came to our attention that Audible, which is owned by Amazon, as we all know, is now allows consumers to return any audiobook within a year. And if you're premium plus, I think it is, and you pay a subscription per month, you get a free credit every month. And when you take, you get a book with your free credit, you can return it as soon as you're done with it and exchange it for another free book. So what this means, and every time a book is returned or exchanged, so when it's purchased, the author is given a credit for the purchase.
They're given a royalty.
A royalty, what I mean,
Okay,
yeah, royalty. When that book is returned or exchanged, that royalty is deducted. So you
Right.
can actually, on your report sometimes have negative. And
You lose
that to
money.
us, is so unfair. And they just decided to do this on their own, calling it return. So we, the Authors Guild, are getting involved and, going to try to get them to put an end to this. But that's the kind of problem that you see when you've got a monopoly controlling an entire platform. And I want to thank Josie and a couple other people brought this to our attention. So thank you, because it's really shameful. So I want to move on now to sort of some of the big themes of the books. I have two remaining questions, broadly speaking, and maybe we can talk about them together. We've got about 15 minutes left. So the first is, are we losing writers? Because it's harder to make a living, because it's stressful. Is it harder for young people who don't come from money to go into it as a career today? And maybe Roxana, you both teach, you can tell us about what you see. We do wonder, and Bill, you raised this in all the arts. Are we losing potential gifted artists today? What does that mean for us as a society? And then the next thing I want to get to is, what can we do? What can we do to ensure that our literature includes diverse writers, to ensure that literature, but we continue to have a robust body of literature in this country? So who wants to go first? At least we can talk about what it is today. Are we at risk of losing great literature? Or we can talk about, what can we do?
I actually think this is a good time to publish in some ways for outsiders, in some ways,
Yeah.
not in all ways, because, and I think Bill talks about this in his book too, you can get published now. And you don't have to wait until Knopf calls you. You could publish and you can get your ideas out there. And that's a wonderful thing. That's a wonderful thing. And you can work really, really hard to develop your audience. And I have seen many people do that. A lot of young people who are very savvy, who have none of the anxieties that Gen X or boomers or the silent generation have about relentless self-promotion. They actually see it as a really smart move. And I'm surrounded by students who are so brilliant and talented, and not all of them come from a great deal of resources. And sometimes they have incredible stories. And I kind of think, oh, I hope that they make it, but they're going to have to, and they do have that capacity. That said, and this is going to be the craziest thing I'm going to say, great literature is not something that happens all the time anyway. Like it's, I just judged the Pulitzer last year, and the year before that I judged the National Book Award. I'm constantly judging all these things, fellowships, and I see a lot of really wonderful things. But do I think everything is fantastic? No, maybe I'll see, let's say 200 things that are really amazing. And if there's 200,000 things, I think it's good that they're all out there. Do I think we can all make a living as writers? I think that's really, really hard. It's always been really hard. And right now, it's incredibly punitive to be an artist, but I think it's always been really punitive to be an artist. And I can't believe I'm saying this right now at the Authors Guild panel, but I guess I keep thinking about Grace Paley. She says to keep a low overhead. That's the advice that she had for artists. And I always think about that. I think, like, what can I do to keep a low overhead, and what can I do to manage expectations of, my audience, my readership? But I think if you really want to be a writer, you're going to do it. Like, no one's going to stop you.
Hello. Yes. Thank you.
So, and not because Knopf says no, you're just going to keep doing it. I think what Josie's doing is she's getting out there and she's fighting. And if you don't want to fight, I'm really sorry, because and I'm not going to tell you to get over it. I'm not.
And you know,
Because
the whole thing about the whole reason why an Amazon was able to zoom the way it does is because it came at an economic time and a technological time where the gatekeepers were changing. The gatekeepers were getting smaller. It happened during a recession. That's when Borders went under. I don't know if everybody
Yeah,
remembers that.
I
So there
do.
were a lot of mid-list authors that got cut.
Well, I have a lot of compassion for mid-list authors, having been one. And I also wanted to say that I'm not going to tell you to toughen up, and I'm not going to tell you to get on social media if you don't feel like it, because you shouldn't. It's really hard out there. It's brutal. So if you don't feel like it, I do feel enormous compassion for you, because not all of our personalities are designed for this. But I also know that throughout the history of time, if you really wanted to make something, you might try it. And if you feel like you need more support, then hire people. There are a lot of professionals out there who are very smart about these issues, and maybe you can get more support. Also, if you feel more comfortable, not on social media, but let's say doing newsletters, getting email lists. I mean, I've seen all these different approaches to things, but the horse has left the barn. You're not going to get technology to change. Like, this disintermediation has occurred, the disruption has occurred, and we have to somehow figure out how to keep them from overtaking us and eating us whole. But it's there. So it's not all bad news. Like, I don't want to give all bad news.
It's not all bad news, but I have to say that we on the panel are all privileged in a certain respect.
Right.
I don't like using that word, and we're privileged. No, I mean specifically we're chronologically privileged. I think we're all at least 50, and that means that we started at a different time.
Yes.
And of course, it's always hard. And of course, writers are going to write because they're compelled to write, at least until their economic situation becomes so dire that they don't have time. And there are writers like that. But I think maybe people our age who've established careers are not sufficiently aware of the fact that it's a different order of magnitude of difficulty now for young writers. And to get back to what Mary's asking about, the risk is that it becomes a rich kid's game, even more than it always has been. And that also affects diversity and access and inclusion, because we know that wealth tends to be white in this country. So it's a real thing. And of course, the technological horse is not going to be led back into the barn. But we can't just say it's always been hard, and young people who really have, if it's meant to be, it'll happen. If you work hard enough, no, not necessarily.
No. That's not what I'm saying. I am actually noticing that people of color, especially BIPOC, are incredibly active at building audiences. And that's the reason why I said it's not all bad news. So
Agreed.
Most of my peers are BIPOC, and they are really, really active, and they're significantly younger than I am. And they're the ones who are kind of holding my hand and say, try this. And I'm grateful, because they do have an understanding of marketing, and I'm getting over myself of the anxiety and the shame that I have for wanting to get more attention. So, but you're absolutely right. But I am actually encouraged by the number of BIPOC who are being included in publishing right now. I'm actually encouraged by it.
Yeah.
Well, yes. I mean, there's that, and there's a big movement to do that, and a big movement of self-empowerment. But I think it's just important to recognize that we can't leave the economic piece out of it. For example, publishers might want to hire more BIPOC people, but if they're still paying an absurdly, a wage to live in New York that nobody can live in New York unless they have family money, it's not going to help. That all the goodwill in the world isn't going to help. Mm-hmm. That's all I'm saying.
You're right.
Plus which, as Mary has said, the elephant in the room is Amazon, and Amazon is squeezing the publishers. They are really changing the landscape, and what the Authors Guild is trying to resist that, and to start renegotiating terms and saying this is not acceptable. You can't squeeze the creators. You can't make it impossible for people to write. unless they're working 5 jobs and getting money elsewhere. I mean, we're trying to return the horses. I mean, I don't know where the horse is at this point.
Good shot.
But we have to push back against what has happened to us. And that's what the Authors Guild is doing. And that's what Bill's book is allowing us to consider doing. I mean, we can't just let this continue.
So I'd like to, that's a good segue. I'd like to now talk about sort of next steps. You know, what can we be doing now? What can the Authors Guild be doing, or authors collectively, to ensure that we have a diverse, robust literary landscape in this country? Which means that, as Bill just pointed out, that, you know, people from all kinds of backgrounds need to be able to afford to be professional writers, right? To be educated as writers, to spend you know, the large proportion of their time writing, and not you know, being professional writers. So, you know, we had some interesting questions on this from the audience, and I'll just to get the conversation going, I'll give you some of them. You know, one was, well, do we all just unite and go on strike against the publishers? We, you know, just, you know, the Authors Guild, we're pulling together a coalition to allow freelance creators to collectively bargain, which means that we can talk to each other about money, and that requires an exemption from the antitrust law. So, you know, once we get a new Congress in place that might be more willing to listen to us on this, we will be pushing forward on that. But we could, you know, we could still do it anyway. So that's an idea. A couple people said, well, what about patronage? Maybe we need to go back to a patronage system of some sorts, you know, whether it's corporate or rich people. Does literature, as opposed to commercial work, does that need to be supported by philanthropy? You know, like opera, like ballet? Does the federal government need to step in and help support literature? It does in many other countries. The government, we were in Iceland on an Authors Guild trip last summer, and you know, the government gives money to almost every writer, every professional writer. There's all kinds of, in Ireland, writers get big tax deduction for the first 50,000 of income. So there are things the federal government could do, whether our government would or not, I don't know. Someone said, well, what about a new WPA federal arts project? In the 70s, there was the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act that employed 10,000 artists. So if I could hear from all of you about some ideas about what organizations and authors can do to help change the mindset, change the profession.
Yeah. Poor Mary, she gets these emails from me, you know, about 3 a.m. her time, where I have all these, you know, high concept ideas that hit on these topics specifically. And the bottom line is, I feel that, you know, a high tide does raise all boats, and we are a collective. We are, and as a collective, there is so much we can do, including promoting each other, believe it or not. I mean, it's done all the time, and it's being done in small collectives. I see it all over social media, because as you know, part of my business hat, I do have to have a social media presence. It's how I found out about the Audible debacle. So, you know, I think that's a good place to jump off, is saying, as a collective, as long as we have a voice and we use our voice to sing in the same choir, I think we're going to be able to make a lot of noise.
Roxana, Min, Bill, do you have any thoughts?
I mean, I think the government supporting writers is a great idea, but I think that's, again, I think it's looking at it backwards. The big economic issue is the fact that these big tech platforms are taking the money away from the writers. We shouldn't have to have the government prop up the system. It should be, the government should start addressing this shift that's taken place.
I agree. I mean, I think many of the ideas that you listed, Mary, are great. I think what we really need to do centrally for all the arts is to take on the platforms. And I mean, very few things give me hope these days, but there seems to be a lot of energy now in the direction of antitrust.
Yeah.
So that means breaking up the big companies, and the core platforms that can't be broken up need to be regulated like utilities.
Yeah.
It's possible that that might even happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I should say the Authors Guild is in DC working on these issues.
One of the issues that I have with social media, and which I think Roxana hit it right on the head, especially in regard to something like a Facebook. We're the jesters, we're the court jesters, we're the ones providing them content. And it's because of their model. They also sell ads, and that's how they make big money. I would gladly jump off of a Facebook or have them go to a model where I can pay them $5 a month to be a part of it. And that's how they make their money. But then the rest is up to us. And there could be other ways they could make money off of us, but with us, i.e. become a royalty, pay me a royalty for my words, for being the jester,
Yeah. Yeah, I actually have this idea that people should own their own data, and that the platform should pay people to use it.
That's perfect.
Yeah, it would help with income inequality. So anything else? It's 8:12. I want to close up in 3 minutes. So if anybody has any final thoughts.
I think that people should still feel encouraged to keep making their work. I think that the marketing is really difficult, but in some ways, I've learned a lot about marketing. I've learned about how uncomfortable I am and how I can keep going. I am actually on all social media platforms. I'm an introvert. Like, I didn't really start talking until almost middle school. And I'm doing strange things. I'm on Twitter, and I'm on Instagram, and I'm also on Facebook. And I've also learned a lot about my readers, because my readers reach out to me. And I think I must spend at least about 30 minutes to an hour every day on social media, engaging. And I don't do everything. I can't. There's just no way I can do everything. I can't look at all the direct messages, but I do feel like it's useful when I do use it. If I use whatever little power that I have in my little niche world for other writers, and I do it, I advertise this event as much as I possibly could. And I do it even though I'm really uncomfortable doing it. And I think I did it on my Instagram. There are little things that we writers can do. I think collectively we have to tackle the really big problems, but on a day-to-day, there are little things I can do, and I try to do them. And I really encourage all of us to try to do it, despite the fact that it's really a pain. That said, if you have, depression or other issues, and you don't want to do them, I totally understand that too. So I don't want to say everybody needs to toughen up, because that isn't really realistic, and it's not very kind. But and we tend to have a lot of those issues in our community. So I want to be mindful of that. Yeah. But I think lifting each other's books, especially if you love it, it's something that we should do. And just this past week, I recommended a book to Australia for, the Sydney Morning Herald, because I was asked to. I just recommended a book to the New York Times. I mean, I do whatever I can. And I think people are asking because I did cultivate some social media presence. Like, it's not like I have a gazillion followers, but because I work as a journalist, other journalists and I work together. And I think little teeny segments are approachable, but I don't think it's about having 1 million followers. Like, I don't know any writers who I care about who have that, but you could reach a certain segment. And I think it might be worth doing, because media book coverage, as you guys know, is gone. I mean, it's really, really gone. So how else are people going to know about books unless we start talking about it? And even if the government did get involved, even if tech companies could be curbed, we still have to get out there. And I don't know if it's a marketing thing more as just a genuine enthusiasm that we could share with other readers.
Thank you, Men, for leaving us with that positive thought. that we all should be supporting each other, supporting each other's books, supporting reading, supporting books, you know, and there is so much else that can divert our attention. And I agree with what Josie said, that social media also gives us the ability to work together and unite and spread information, and is a powerful tool for you know, working together. So I would like to once again thank our panelists, all of you. We're honored to have you as part of the Authors Guild Foundation family, and we're really grateful to you and this thought-provoking conversation tonight. And Bill, thanks for your book. It's so apropos of our work. So thanks. And I want to make sure everybody knows that we're going to be having more interesting conversations like this in the month ahead. So look out for these invitations. And on behalf of the Authors Guild Foundation, I just thank everyone for being part of this tonight, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing
Thank
that.
you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks to all of you.